Try as one might, it's fairly hard to find a TV show that inspires as much laughter and joy as SpongeBob SquarePants. It feels silly to even describe it simply as a TV show at this point. Throughout its now 22-year existence, the characters have become part of everyday life. That little yellow sponge and all of his friends inspire happiness in every person that calls themselves a fan, and undoubtedly has a place in millions and millions of people's hearts, not to mention in any list documenting the most successful TV shows of all time. So what happens when someone seeks to subvert that positivity? To intentionally extract those notions of joy, replacing them with something hollow, dispiriting, or even uncanny? SpongeBob has its fair share of episodes that inspire feelings of eeriness and discomfort, but its episodic structure ensures that things always end on a positive note. So maybe one has to look outside of the scope of the program itself to find examples of meaningful deviations from this upbeat vibe. The first example that springs to mind is the infamous Squidward creepypasta, a story shared online involving a lost SpongeBob episode lacking severely in the show's usual jovial demeanour, as its title would suggest. The online myth makes use of the disquieting notion of lost media, but its execution is lacking, with spelling errors and pretty shoddy storytelling all round. Conversely, a good example of perfect execution is Meat Canyon's video Secret Formula.
Another day, servicing the masses.
Oh, SpongeBob. They can't get enough. They want more.
The video is fantastic and incredibly well made, but it lacks that deep eeriness that one can sense in the almost neo-mythic lore of Squidward's suicide. Secret Formula is evidently a parody, and as such is funny as well as being very weird. So where can you find a creation with the eerie staying power of lost media and the fresh-faced execution of parody? Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom is an album by self-professed parody producer flashhclubb. Released on their own Bandcamp initially in early 2021, the project has since found a wider audience due to its cassette release on Liminal Records. Its sound certainly evokes a feeling of lost media, but we'll get on to how it achieves this later. Let's focus on the parody side of things, as the album is not a pastiche of SpongeBob, but rather a popular experimental album that has a story all of its own. Everywhere at the End of Time is a 6-part album by Leland Kirby under the pseudonym The Caretaker in a reference to the film The Shining. The album received widespread critical acclaim as its individual parts and in its entirety, and as you may have seen, it also achieved a fair amount of popularity on TikTok, touted as a cursed or dangerous album to listen to. A lot of its success and notoriety has to do with its core premise. The album is an exploration into dementia, a syndrome resulting in memory loss and decreased brain functionality that usually happens in old age and is affecting more and more people year after year. Each stage of the album showcases a gradually declining mental state. Kirby weaves this story by implementing distortion, reverb and saturation over the project's lengthy runtime to represent a mind slowly succumbing to dementia. As we make our way through Everywhere at the End of Time, the harrowing sounds of the slowly fading mind overpower the warmth of the memories. Songs falter and fade, replaced with a cold, indifferent dissonance. It's a tough listen, not only due to its runtime, but also because of its incredibly visceral depiction of dementia. The album mostly utilizes ballroom music by artists such as Layton and Johnston and Al Bowley, a move again inspired by The Shining. So this is our inspiration. Though Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom may look like it has more to do with SpongeBob than The Caretaker, this is the main checkpoint for flashhclubb's parody. It is through this format that the producer explores the spectacle of SpongeBob. So how do they do this? The music of SpongeBob SquarePants is an integral part of the show's overall appeal. The songs complement the show's quirky nature with an amalgamation of different musical styles, primarily sea shanties and songs with a Hawaiian tone. It provides support for the frantic swings in mood and tone that the stories often indulge in, and it adds a sort of antiquated quality that ties the show to older programming that Steven Hillenburg originally drew inspiration from. For the first season, Nicholas Carr, the music director for the show, utilised library music.
The first season's music came primarily from the APM library since they had a huge diverse selection of music, including lots of great old corny Hawaiian music and big full dramatic orchestral scores. I started digging into their archives for offbeat quirky music that would properly paint the musical background that Steve was going for.
As the show grew, Carr compiled a selection of instrumentalists into a band called the Spongedivers to create original music that would allow for more musical freedom, while still sticking to the surfy, sailory aesthetic that the cartoon had pressed on with. The pieces procured from APM and composed by the Spongedivers are the songs that are used on Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom. When taken out of context, the laid-back Hawaiian sounds of SpongeBob can seem pretty weird. However, flashclubb dares to reach beyond these tracks, also lifting songs from the more quaint and nautical side of SpongeBob, making use of recognisable tunes such as Hall Piep and the Rake Hornpipe. There are a number of differences between Leyland Kirby's original album and flashclubb's parody. Some that are fairly easy to explain, and others that enable us to investigate the Spongy release a little more ardently, and uncover whether there is any depth to what essentially presents itself as a meme or a parody album. One of the most obvious differences is the length of the two projects, Everywhere at the End of Time running a whole 5 hours longer than Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom. The reasoning for this is fairly simple, as parodies by nature are primarily concerned with creating a pastiche of something in order to satirise it or change it slightly. The parody style also explains the slightly humorous nature of Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom, though really, the comedic elements within the project, the titles and the artwork, can only really exist in any funny sense in proximity to SpongeBob. When listening to the project in its entirety, the overarching feeling tends to be one of eeriness. On the other hand, here is a crucial difference between the two. The track's lengths on flashclubb's release do not get longer as we move through the album, and the titles of the songs do not deteriorate. These are both things that happen on the original release. The first part of Everywhere at the End of Time starts off fairly well structured, with tracks of around 2 to 3 minutes. These tracks have sad but fairly simple titles like All That Follows Is True and My Heart Will Stop in Joy. As we progress through the first half of the project, these titles become more depressing and troubling, like Surrendering to Despair in Part 2 and Internal Bewildered World in Part 3. From that point on, track durations are long and drawn out and the titles have become completely free form. These two factors breaking down further assert the loss of equilibrium in the subject's mind due to the onset of dementia. This does not happen on Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom, save for a 19-minute penultimate track and the titles becoming a little more conclusive in their tone rather than deteriorating visually. We don't have that same growing disregard for style and structure that we did on Leyland's original. So here is a pretty meaningful diversion from the source material. The breakdown over its duration is a key part of the original, but it is absent from Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom. This, to me, says something very important about flashclubb's album. On the Caretaker's original, we spectate the deterioration of an individual's mind. We walk through a representation of the inside of their head as it shrivels and darkens, and as large parts of it are lost. On flashclubb's parody, we spectate the disassembling and corrosion of an imagined world, so the concept is less dependent on that sense of deterioration stretched over the runtime. Now, it feels important to state at this point that this is of course an interpretation of the album. Some may agree with it, some may find other things at play, and some may interpret the album simply as a parody or a meme, a joke with an elongated punchline. So at the least, this is a theory through which to assess Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom, separate from the artistic intent. But just to be safe, let me explore the theory through fairly simple terms. Let's review the importance of the sounds used and then interrogate the artwork. When I showed the quote from Nick Carr earlier, there was a specific part highlighted. The songs he chose painted a musical background. If you take Spongebob out of Bikini Bottom, he's still Spongebob. He still has his trademark laugh and his general sense of joviality. In fact, background designer Kenny Pittenger said, Steve came at Spongebob from a character-first direction. But to properly showcase Spongebob and Patrick and all of the other characters living out their lives, the music is needed as much as the aqueous background and flowery clouds.
They all look like flowers, SpongeBob. All the time. They sure do. You know, normally...
The setting and the music work in tandem, giving the characters' lives context and a general narrative supporting undertone. On the flip side, the backdrop without the characters is sort of unnerving. It's instantly recognizable, but we get the sense that things only really happen when the characters are present, and without them, there is a slightly disquieting atmosphere. We're so used to the characters' energy pushing the narrative forward that it feels slow and uncanny. Now, if we add Leyland Kirby's method of eerie sound manipulation, all the calm and relaxing aspects of the music fade. It's as if the beautiful flowery backdrop of the show has been crumpled and distorted and faded over time. This description feels fairly similar to the short animation Rejected by Don Hertzfeld. The way the imagined world his characters existed in comes crashing down around them, the paper scrunched up and the little people and creatures destroyed by the very basis of their existence. Instead of purposeful destruction, however, on Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom, we spectate a place that has been disassembled and succumbed to a long and lethargic aging process. Its once tranquil vista now lifeless and futile. Listening to it, it's like all the characters have left a long time ago, and now the place is familiar but abandoned. The artwork is instantly recognizable to any SpongeBob fan.
Well, that's easy. All you need is a box.
And imagination.
It's the box Patrick and SpongeBob make use of in the episode The Idiot Box. In this episode, much like the ballroom scene in The Shining, we watch a character's mental state fool them into thinking that something is real when it isn't.
Blast off!
We also listen with Squidward as SpongeBob and Patrick create a range of scenarios and worlds in their box, where anything seems possible. This box story is somewhat representative of the creative process that Steven Hillenburg and his team embarked on. They wanted to create a story where there were no restrictions on one's imagination. SpongeBob and Patrick relinquish the box and it ends up at the dump with Squidward still inside. As mentioned, SpongeBob is episodic, meaning everything resets at the end of each adventure, but this ending is fairly memorable. I couldn't help but think of all those imagined worlds that existed inside the box and felt so real, slowly succumbing to the murk and the mud of the dump. This is what we hear on Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom, an imagined world decimated by the unflinching passage of time. SpongeBob SquarePants is still going. SpongeBob is still as fresh-faced and positive as ever, despite the world being a very different place than when the show started. Like many shows and media entities that accrue a significant profit, it exists in a state of suspended animation due to its popularity, in order for Nickelodeon to get as much financial use out of it as possible. Its gradually declining ratings may result in SpongeBob's adventures coming to an end at some point in the near future, but with new seasons and even spin-off shows, it doesn't look like this will be anytime soon. This is an aspect of SpongeBob that Flash Clubb themselves said inspired them. This deterioration in quality has caused the show to become something that some of its oldest and most passionate fans would barely recognise. Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom can be seen to represent this deterioration artistically. The album allows us entry into an alternate reality. It's like a soundtrack to everything that is the antithesis of SpongeBob SquarePants: slow, lethargic, somber, and vague. The album's artwork and the track titles utilise engaging and somewhat comical aspects of parody, but the overall feeling is one of disturbance. Over its runtime, flashclubb invites the listener to walk through that eerily familiar setting of Bikini Bottom, as it is rendered a place devoid of purpose. Everywhere at the End of Bikini Bottom shows us the realm of Steven Hillenburg's imagination as a physical space, desolated by the passage of time, blurred and obscured by the absence of a focal point, and haunted by a sense of familiarity.
Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't heard of LISTENCORP before, come and check it out. It's a review blog and magazine. The names appearing on your screen right now are our patrons, who obviously help us to do things like this. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and come and check us out.